Just listen to this. So what these are bursts, are pulsed microwave weapons being shot into my skull, basically. They are extremely painful. They shoot right here, which is why I know where to hold this measuring device to. Hang on. So, as you can see, the attacks are now happening every couple of seconds here. And they are absolutely brutal. I can show you my shielding panels, and these shots have to come from above. So this is what the government, or rather intelligence agency run, organized takedown program, physical takedown program looks like. Every couple of seconds a burst from military microwave weapons to the head. This is punching through your house wall and through your skull, basically. Sorry, I'm looking down and not at you because I'm trying to make sure you can see that. Every couple of seconds, the ones which sound really rough are extremely painful. The ones which sound like metallic clicking. So these are non-stop shots to the head. You've seen a couple now, right? Let's just wait for another one. Okay. They're extremely painful, and if I switch this off, because humans cannot hear or sense or smell microwaves, if I just switch this off and you do not have the sensor here, and by the way, this only shows part of the spectrum. This is it's called an electrosmog detector, which is a very cutesy name, but it's actually a high frequency detector with which you can also detect parts of microwave attacks. This measures between 200 megahertz and 8 gigahertz only, and there are attacks also outside that spectrum. But already the noise you heard, these brutal bursts, they correlate 100% with the shots to my head. So at least part of the spectrum that's used, that's punching through the walls of my house and into my skull and through my skull, actually, I can detect. When this thing is off, you hear nothing. I have now been assaulted with these microwave weapons overtly. I was assaulted beforehand, but overtly, so that it was blindingly obvious, since January 2016. Today is the 30th of November. So for 11 months, my body has been maimed with military-grade weapons aimed at me by British intelligence and their cooperating partners. What many people do not know is that the intelligence agencies are not owned or controlled anymore by one national government. They have fused. I'm not the only person who says that. There's also an author who died, and I've heard that he might have been murdered, called Christopher Story. And I think Christopher Story, that was the pen name of Edward Hall. And before he died, he said that the intelligence agencies are now vertically and horizontally integrated. In English, that means they are a cartel unto themselves. They are not controlled by governments, and they don't give a damn about our governments, or our laws, or our police. In fact, our police seems to be controlled by them. Now, what this means is that in the year 2016, scientists, entrepreneurs, academics, lawyers, doctors are being brutally assaulted with military technology inside their own home. If I switch this thing off, you cannot hear anything. if I now do what I usually have to do to protect my head when these attacks start up, the only thing that blocks out electromagnetic weapons are sheets of metal. Now, I can't use an iron door and hold it above my head for protection, but that would be best. But what is next, almost as good, is aluminium foil. So you have to build yourself a roof. But I can also tell you that one layer of aluminium is not enough because they punch through. You have to use ideally 6 layers, but 3 or 4 are already really good. You have to fold it and just hold it in the direction from where the beam is coming. And be careful that your fingers are not on that side, because these military lasers punch through. They punch through your fingers, get reflected on the aluminium, and then go back through. Extremely painful, as I've experienced. Because sometimes in a panic, when your head starts being shot into by these psychopaths, you literally just do this, and then they start hitting your fingers. And when you do not have the aid of these measuring devices, and I would start doing that, you would think, oh, she's mad, she must be mad. No, the victims are trying to protect themselves, because real protection is almost impossible. They are trying to dampen the effect of military weapons being applied to them. You can see their effect, and I've just shown you. You can see that this is an independent scientific device, and it can make it audible, and you heard the brutal attacks. And whilst I'm speaking, they are continuing. They are shooting into my eye, into my skull, wherever they can, because they are out of control, degenerate psychopaths. And every single decade, since records are public, we can show that the intelligence agencies have just mutilated people in the most psychopathic, sadistic way possible. And I can name you a European intelligence agency mutilating, or Western intelligence agency mutilating people in large numbers for every single decade in the 20th century. So in the US, for example, I think it was the 1930s, I think it's pronounced the Tuskegee experiments, where I think that was the Tuskegee experiments where they infected blacks with syphilis in very large numbers and then watched them degrade, just to find out what the effect is. In the 1940s and 1950s, we had MK Ultra in the US, but also here in England. It continued into the 60s and 70s. COINTELPRO, that also happened in the US, it's now public, but also here. But of course, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had the Stasi in Germany, right? And in that time, you can also find intelligence agency abuses in Latin America, perpetrated by, for example, British intelligence. And on and on and on and on. So it is not surprising that the intelligence agencies are out of control, mutilating innocent people, because that's what they do. That is why they're secret. Because if they weren't, we would realize that it is one big criminal cartel. And now they are maiming civilians in very large numbers in their own home. And if you don't believe me, I can turn this back on. So these attacks happen every couple of seconds. They are extremely painful. They're extremely painful. And what this is targeted neurological degradation. They also shoot at your heart, your inner organs, your lungs, and your joints. At night when I'm lying in bed, they particularly like to microwave my joints to basically cripple me whilst I lie there trying to sleep in agony. Most nights since the attacks began, I'm writhing in pain at night for hours, as my neighbors, because most of these transmitters are at my neighbor's house, are microwaving me with high power military lasers. And this equipment is not big. If you put it down, it would almost be like a camera watching a house from a distance. And unbeknown to the people, the camera, what they thought is a camera, is actually a high-powered microwave laser. They also operate things that are called phase arrays, where you can put several of these things together, wire them up, and actually make them, act together. Have two beams overcross, and because they punch through your house walls and punch through you, where the beams overcross, that's where the pain is most intense. That's also being done, and I've got evidence for that. For example, when they shoot at your head with continuous microwave lasers, or microwave beams, I should say, because they're not necessarily coherent light. This is what lasers really are. They are mostly focused light, as far as I can tell. But when two beams overcross in your head, on my head, when I'm being assaulted, I sometimes can tell that there are two beams by just waving my hands around, and the position at which my knuckles are aching because these beams are punching through my knuckles, that is one beam, and then somewhere else I'll find a second beam. That I've also done by now, over the last 11 months of these assaults. So you have to ask yourself, how many more people have to be tortured to death? And this is not an accident. This is premeditated. And there's a shift service. Sometimes the attacks would start up exactly at 8 p.m. and then continue for hours. Why? Because the shift service starts at 8 p.m. And they would start a new assault program, testing weapons and figuring out for the weapons and pharma industry how you can degrade a person bit by bit inside their own home. A lot of people who tried to blow the whistle on this have already been murdered. Dr. Ronnie Kilder has been murdered, but many, many, many more. I have the list here, I have sent the Bundeskriminalamt, and you can see their crest there, a letter for now I think the second or third time, because I was brutally assaulted in Germany as well. And I asked them to please give me a case number, which they refused in the beginning. Then I asked them again to finally give me a case number, which they then did, with the actual comment that I should not write to them again. And then they have, you can see it stapled here, returned my letter, the original letter, which has my signature on it, to me with their official letter, so that my letter does not enter my file. Now this is already falsifying official documents, because when I send a letter to the Bundeskriminalamt, it has to enter the record. And these people sent me the physical letter back. That's my letter here, which is attached to their letter. And why did they do that? Because in that I listed all the people who were murdered or driven to suicide or died under suspicious circumstances related to microwave weapons. And I listed them year by year. It's 1997, Irma Schmunk. 2004, Robert Bourne. 2007, Yelena Blinikova. 2008, Ludmila Malanchuk. 2010, Klaus Walter Will, Irina Shuzinina, and Monica B. 2011, Andrei Sarkin. 2012, Rita Tilly-Thomas and Dr. Hans Scheiner. 2013, Pfarrer Carsten Häuplein, Dr. Max Stadler, Sergei Vassil Shunin, Anja Mensching. 2015, Alöna Schneid, Philipp Missfelder, Britta Jacquard, Ruth Jill. 2016, Walter Madliger. And I said that in every single one of those cases, well, some of them were not necessarily victims themselves, but some of them were people helping victims, like the Dr. Hans Scheiner, or politicians trying to find out what is happening to the victims, and they've all died under suspicious circumstances. And I also wrote that as far as the victims were concerned, they have been complaining publicly on the internet for years before they died. And the police did nothing for years. It is impossible for the police to claim they did not know. And in those cases, it was also pretty clear from the descriptions that the perpetrators must be something like 200 meters, within 200 meters radius around the home of these people. So for police force not to be able to track them down over a several year period is impossible. Then I also sent them a list of VIP victims from around the world, which every single one of these you can research yourself, and you can find out that these people are real. I said in the US, so people complain about either just being stalked or stalked and also irradiated. So we have Professor Daryl Hamamoto, professor at University of California, Davis, who complains about being stalked by the UC Davis cops. Dr. Eric Karlstrom, emeritus professor of geology at University of California, Stanislaus. He's stalked and irradiated heavily and publicly talks about that. Karen Hudes, ex-general counsel of the World Bank, she's being stalked, harassed, suffers breaks-in into her home, and has been attacked by scalar weapons or directed energy weapons, which is another name for microwave weapons or electromagnetic weapons. James Walbert, an inventor, he has been stalked, irradiated and implanted. Julianne McKinney, ex-military intelligence, she's being stalked and irradiated. Renata Murray, an activist, she's being stalked and irradiated. John McAfee, the actual developer of the McAfee antivirus software, is publicly complaining about being stalked. Eric Leo, a young scientist, he's being irradiated and attacked with psychotronic weapons and publicly talks about having his brain print read out. Michael Hastings, journalist, as you know, has been murdered. There's Brian Tew, an ex-military contractor who's being irradiated and tortured heavily. You can see his YouTube channel with extreme directed attacks, extreme headaches, which by the way are also caused here in my flat. The beam in that case, as far as I could make out, seems to be hitting the back of my head, but also follows me around the house and seems to come from south-southeast. Mark Rich, an author, also I think stalked and tortured. Then in England we've got Philip Kerr, the businessman, who's been stalked by MI5, has been kidnapped and drugged, amongst many other things, but his stalking has lasted now for 13.5 years. Carl Clark, ex-military intelligence, irradiated, attacked with psychotronic weapons. His marriage has been broken up, and he's got a very strange leg infection that doctors can't identify. Dareem Daoud, businessman, he's been murdered and irradiated before he was murdered. Andrea Davison, ex-military intelligence, she's been stalked, robbed and had to flee the country. Baroness Jones, an MP, she's being stalked and is publicly known that she's under surveillance. Christopher Story, I mentioned, who's said to have been murdered. Melanie Shaw, a whistleblower in a child abuse case, is in prison, is in solitary confinement out of all things, and it looks like, to me at least, that she might have been severely irradiated because her face is asymmetrical after 1 year in HMP Peterborough. Dr. Reinhard Munzert, University of Erlangen, extremely heavily irradiated and tortured. Peter Kutzer, heavily irradiated and tortured. Rolf Gössner, a lawyer, and he's been under surveillance for 40 years for attending a protest as a university student. Then it's said that there are over 2,700 victims, 43 children, known to charities in Germany alone. Now in Belgium we've got Melanie Richan, who's heavily irradiated and has been implanted against her will. In the Netherlands we've got Peter Mooring, a software designer, also heavily irradiated. Beate Zalewska, a photographer, also heavily irradiated. In Israel we've got Doreen Dotan, a human rights activist, who says she's 60% disabled and she's being terrorized and heavily irradiated. Now, all of these people say the same. All of these people are being tortured in the most brutal fashion. And on this list you had it all. You had human rights activists, software designers, scientists, lawyers, doctors, professors, everything, businessmen, everything. And it is now public. These people are being tortured publicly. Their testimonies are online. You can find every single person who I mentioned online. And what's also online is the arms traders who are selling this stuff. I also pointed out to the Bundeskriminalamt that there's an arms dealer who's manufacturing electromagnetic weapons and detectors for electromagnetic weapons. I mean, you can see how one can create a market, can't you? You can, and that's exactly what's happening. You can sell assault weapons cheaply and then detectors for a bit more money. And then one assault weapon creates several victims who then have to buy the measuring equipment to detect the assaults, to prove them, to then go to court and so on. So you create your own market. And there's one arms company which has a YouTube channel. It's called Aronia, A-A-R-O-N-I-A. I happen to have their measuring equipment, being a victim and not a perpetrator, so it's spelled A-A-R-O-N-I-A. And if you go to their YouTube channel, you will find one video called the Aronia Smart RF Generator up to 6 gigahertz. So that's the title. RF stands for radio frequencies. So the title is Aronia Smart RF Generator up to 6 gigahertz. If you click on that video and listen to it from 2 minutes 30 seconds onwards, you will hear how the CEO of Aronia, Mr. Schmelius, explains how his devices work. And he says, this is now what a microwave weapon looks like. It's very sci-fi. You can just hold it like that and point it at people, right? Now I have, this handle can be detached and then the flat panel fits into a handbag. It's very light. Now for me it's connected to the measuring device you've just seen here, right? It's measuring the frequency distribution in my flat. However, if you unscrew this cable here and use a little box that you screw on here, which is generating frequencies, then this thing becomes much more compact and you can just assault people with it. Now he openly says that these devices, he explains how you can buy one of his little black boxes and put it on and then send frequencies as opposed to receive frequencies over this antenna, which is what I'm doing. I'm measuring things. I'm not sending out waves, I'm measuring them. But you can put a frequency generator on here and then send out frequencies, and he publicly explains how that can be used as a jammer. And he immediately corrects himself and laughs and he says, oh, of course I didn't say that, because jammers are illegal anywhere in the world, and therefore we call them field strength generators. And then it's okay. So if you don't call it a jammer but a field strength generator, it's okay. And he's selling jammers. But the point is that if you tune the frequency, what you have is a jammer for people, or in the worst case, a lethal weapon for people. Because these things, if you have enough power and if you get the frequency right, you can assault people in their own home. You can shoot through walls with this. So, and that's precisely what is happening. That is precisely what is happening to the victims. They are inside their own home and they are being assaulted. And I have said, I sent the police the description of this YouTube channel, of where the electromagnetic weapons are, and what the CEO says himself publicly about his equipment. And I said, would it not be time to finally start investigating? To the Bundeskriminalamt, who then took my letter and returned it to me. With my letter, here you can see they even ripped the corner where I had stapled it. They ripped that out. They stapled it themselves onto their letter and they sent it back so that this doesn't enter the case file, which is run under case number ZI1225399 and is handled by a man called Rainer Maser. Now, I have sent them a letter beforehand explaining the assaults on me and asking to investigate. So if they have now sent, this is how they dealt with my second letter, I would be intrigued to know what's on my file now. Because files seem to be removed from the file. Are there maybe files also added? Der Bundeskriminalamt? Are there files added as well? Made up files? Can it be? I mean, if you start sending documents back without putting them on the file, written letters, so that they do not enter the file, and you accompany it with the following sentence, and I'll read it out in German. Wir bitten Sie, von weiteren Schreiben/Eingaben an das BKA abzusehen. We ask you to refrain from writing to us again. This is the German Federal Police. Given the gravity of the crimes committed against the population, the only thing that can be concluded from this is that the Bundeskriminalamt is in deep capture. It's that simple. When people do not work how they should be working, it means it's capture. When the crimes are national and affect every single state of Germany, which we now know it does, because because there are so many victims, this means the corruption is at the top. So it's not just capture, it is deep capture. The head of the Bundeskriminalamt has to go. That's what it means. Because they are refusing to investigate crime. And it's not just the head. It might be the next rung down. But it's this simple. This is what deep capture looks like. So that's the situation we have today, basically. I've also reported these crimes to the Swiss police, who have refused to investigate. I have repeatedly asked them here in the local branch, my local police station, they refuse to do anything. I wrote to the Cantonal Kriminalpolizei, so the criminal police of the canton. They passed it back to the local station and gave the investigation to a woman who's working at the police station 2 days per week. When you have to investigate crimes with novel weapons, I do not think that a woman who works at the police station only 2 days per week is the appropriate choice. On the Aronia website you can see yourself what these weapons look like. I have shown you what a weapon looks like. This, my version, is not a weapon because it's connected to a detector. But it could be by someone else who just buys the little black box. They have a murder weapon. A weapon with which you can commit the perfect murder. Because this doesn't have a serial number. It's not registered like a gun would be. And you can shoot through walls without leaving traces. You can cause heart attacks, brain damage, organ damage, cripple joints, damage eyes. Anything you want to. It just depends on the intensity and the frequency. And that's it. So these are serious crimes. These weapons do exist, and therefore as soon as the weapons exist, the victims exist as well. And that's a mathematical certainty. So the question is, when will the deep capture be resolved now? And by whom? Will the journalists finally come forward, because they have all been told about this a long, long time ago? Will the police start investigating, or will they try to lock up the victims, as they've done for decades? An absolute farce. an absolute farce. Dr. Reinhard Munzert, who investigated this over the, I think, 8 years, or 14 years, forgive me, 14 years it is by now, they actually tried to section him. Because it's probably very uncomfortable when he just uncovered that Siemens and the Fraunhofer Institute are also involved. That probably hurt somebody somewhere. But now the sectioning joke does not fly anymore, because there are thousands of victims, and the effects are visible on measuring devices like these and like the other one. So the question I have to you is, when will you finally speak up? Because the victims have been blocked, and they are left to be tortured to death, to be maimed to death in their own home, which is a world premiere, not even in the medieval ages, where you maimed to death in your own home. And if you do not speak up, it might be a dereliction of duty. You might be an accessory to the crime. If you willfully do not speak up about crimes happening, you're part of the cover-up, and you're an accessory to the crime.